Nowadays, there's this tendency of understanding psychedelic therapy or psychedelic healing more as events. Yeah, I went to the jungle, I drank ayahuasca, and this happened. I went to this clinical trial, I took psilocybin or 5-MeO-DMT, and this happened. I took MDMA, and my trauma was healed. Yeah, so we because that is good headlines for media. Like psilocybin heals depression, MDMA is a cure for PTSD. That is good for a headline, but this does not illustrate what happens in reality.
Hello, and welcome back to Adventures Through the Mind. This is a podcast that explores topics relevant and related to psychedelic culture, medicine, spirituality, and research, and always with the underlying question of how can we work with and through our psychedelic experiences to become better people, not just for ourselves, but for all those with whom we are nested in relationship, presently and across time, human and non-human alike. I'm your host, as always, James W. Jesso. As you've probably already guessed based on the title of this episode, today's interview is going to be exploring psychedelic integration. Our guest is someone who is well positioned to have this conversation, and you'll know why based on the bio I'm about to read in a second, but his name is Marc Aixalà. And now I'll read his bio. Marc Aixalà is a practicing psychologist, psychotherapist, and certified holotropic breathwork facilitator who specializes in supporting people facing challenging experiences with expanded states of consciousness. He has worked at the Cosmicare Psychedelic Crisis Intervention Service since 2010, which is kind of like Boom Festival's version of Zendo that's present at Burning Man, but that's an aside. Anyways, it is a on-site festival, basically psych crisis service. He founded the ICEER Support Center in 2013, which provides integration support for individuals through ICEERs, and he has assisted hundreds of cases through that service. He has also collaborated with facilitators from different countries to promote safer psychoactive plant practices through ICEERs and beyond. He's trained in the MAPS MDMA-assisted psychotherapy method and is currently a practicing therapist in clinical trials involving psilocybin. He's the author of the book Psychedelic Integration, Psychotherapy for Non-Ordinary States of Consciousness, and he is the lead instructor on ICEER's upcoming Psychedelic Integration course, aptly titled ICEER's Integration Course. Now, Marc is on the show in part to promote the course, and we're going to talk about that in a second, but he's on the show promoting the course in a way that I believe will offer anyone listening an incredible sort of package of information about psychedelic integration generally, as we're going to go quite in depth into what psychedelic integration is, what it's offered, what it's for, how we do it, timelines for when to apply certain practices. We're going to talk about common mistakes in both the practice of psychedelic integration and in our understanding of it. And we're going to address some specific questions, particularly about derealization or depersonalization, working with so-called bad trips or traumatic experiences, and integrating experiences that are transcendental or transpersonal in nature, ones that don't have such a clear sense of how it applies in our daily lives. So when it comes to psychedelic integration, there are obviously two sides of that. There's the person doing the integrating, and then there's the person or person supporting the person doing the integrating, professional and otherwise. And although the interview today and its content is, I think, could be very beneficial to anyone providing any type of psychedelic therapy or integration coaching, I made sure to funnel the questions and sort of invite Marc to answer the questions in a way that is directly applicable to the journeyer side of the equation, in the hopes that this episode will help any individual who is presently effectively journeying psychedelics or planning to and wants to kind of make the best out of that experience, to get the most out of how it can, be applied into our lives, both in the sense of optimizing its benefits and also in the sense of how to handle the experiences that end up harming us, at least in the short term, such that the harm doesn't continue into the long term. Before we get into it, though, I want to talk about Marc's course, because part of this episode is to promote it, and because, well, I really think iSeers creates incredible online courses. So I'm excited to tell you about it, because I think that if it feels like it's a right fit for you, you're probably going to be really satisfied with what you get out of it. So as to the details, this is a 14-week long course with 60 video lessons and 12 live dialogues with instructors, which includes literally being on live calls where you can ask your questions with the instructors, and a number of video lessons, which are modules that you access online that are released weekly. And here's how iSeers describes the course, and I'm going to basically quote it here, reading it right off their page. People will learn effectively an integration approach that supports people facing challenges after difficult psychedelic experiences, as well as to help individuals to want to just get the best out of an otherwise positive psychedelic experience. Throughout the course, you will learn theoretical foundations and paradigms, the most common situations an integration practitioner may encounter, how to plan and apply a scenario-based intervention protocol, and useful tools and techniques. That's pretty general, clearly. I'm trying to give you the most general picture of this course, letting Marc describe the details and leaving it up to you to basically investigate more of the course if you feel like it fits for you. If you do want to check out the course, head to jameswjesso.com/iSeers, ICEERS integration. A link to that is going to be in the description to this episode wherever you're checking it out as well, so you can jump over there. Applications are open now for early bird, which means 10% off till I think November 17th, and are only open until December 15th, after which point you can no longer sign up for the course. It's going to start in January. It's going to run till about March. As to the price, what's really cool about iSeers is that they effectively gear the price relative to the country that you live in. So I can't really give you what the price will be, because it's going to be dependent on what country you live in. As more affluent countries, it costs more, and less affluent countries, it costs less. But regardless of what country you're in and what your total price will be, if you use the promo code that they generously offered me to offer you, which is JESSO, my last name, you'll get 15% off the price of the course. Now, this is not cumulative on top of the 10% early bird registration. So, if you go for the early bird or you don't, it is what it is. But if you use the promo code JESSO, you're going to get 15% off your course. Again, head to jameswjesso.com/iSeers, ICEERS integration in order to learn more details and to sign up. And one last piece before we get into the interview. I know the intro is running long and I'm doing a lot to talk about this course. I just want to say that I have not personally taken the integration course. However, I'm going to. I'm so excited about the content of this course. I've actively signed up. So if you take the course, you'll be doing it alongside me, because I'm also going to be signing up for it. Or well, I have already signed up for it. I'm also going to be participating. And part of that, and part of why I am, featured Marc, is that what iSeers does and the courses they put together are just incredible. I took their IS safety course a couple of years ago, and I've had Geronimo Mazaraza on here to talk about a handful of times, and it was incredible. I, as a podcaster, as a researcher, have a pretty wide spread of understanding of what's kind of happening and available in the psychedelic field, and what seems to be missing in a lot of perspectives, and what I think would be, time well spent to feature more strongly in the ongoing conversations about psychedelics. And they really hit it right out of the park. A baseball reference for anyone who watched the World Series, what was it, last week? They really hit it out of the park with the IS safety, and I have every confidence that they're doing the same with the integration course. So I'm excited to participate, and I'm excited to see you there if you choose to also participate. And that's all for the intro. Here's my conversation with Marc Aixalà on episode 2002 of Adventures Through the Mind. Enjoy. Marc Aixalà, welcome to Adventures Through the Mind.
Thank you.
So you are here representing, or I guess representing slash showcasing your knowledge and experience as a way of, showcasing and representing an upcoming course regarding psychedelic integration that's going through ICEER's Academy, which is a division of ICEER's. Avid or frequent listeners to the show might recognize the name of that organization. We've had Geronimo on here multiple times, promoting other courses through ICEER's. But in case, and I think with fair assumption that people don't actually know what ICEER's is or ICEER's Academy, and don't talk about your course yet. We're going to get into the whole crux of what the course is. And in the intro, they would have heard me talk about the course. So we're going to talk more about content and end with discussions about the course specifically. But to start us off on this question, what is ICEER's and what is ICEER's Academy?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I hope that what I say about it is going to be coherent with what Geronimo said. Although ICEER's is an organization that does plenty of different things, so probably the view of each member of ICEER's about what is ICEER's is slightly different. Yeah, ICEER's began almost 15 years ago through a group of friends, people that we met through the common interest in plant medicine, in psychedelics, in non-ordinary states, in indigenous knowledge. And it started in a very organic way. My good friend Ben Delonen founded it, and then he was the one that started discovering us and getting us together. So back then, what was common amongst all of us was that we had this interest in how to bridge the knowledge of these traditions that work with plant medicine with what we do in the West. So, how to apply indigenous intelligence, indigenous knowledge, plant medicine in a Western context, and what do we Westerners need in order to integrate these tools in a way that is meaningful and in a way that is useful and in a way that is not appropriating what indigenous people do. Yeah. Then through the years, we've started creating different divisions that had to do with legal aspects of plant medicine, ayahuasca, iboga, and different plants. We also had a more clinical division or scientific division led by my good colleague Jose Carlos Bouso, that he's focused very much on science and on plenty of research through the last 15 years. We've also had the section in which I was more involved, which was the integration service. Yeah, so this was a service for people that had had difficult ayahuasca or psychedelic experiences, and we would support them free of charge. And we've been doing that since the beginning. Yeah, and later on, there's been other divisions, other projects inside of ICEER's. One of them has been the ICEER's Academy. And that has been like a natural evolution of what we had been doing throughout the years. Together with Geronimo and David, we had been, for many years, been running a project that was not public inside of ICEER's. We called it the Dandelion Project, in which we were meeting with people that offer ayahuasca ceremonies, facilitators in different countries. We've been to plenty of different countries. And we were trying to support them in how to increase the safety standards, how to increase the safety of the sessions, how to aim for good and safer practices, and how to support them with the things that they were not especially proficient. So, for example, somebody that has been trained as a ceremony leader, they probably don't know about screening or integration or leading sharing circles. So we would complement on that kind of knowledge to increase the general safety of their sessions. We've been doing that for many years. And at some point, we felt that this was a knowledge and a way of working that was worth making it public. So creating the ICEER's Academy just seemed a natural step into making these kind of activities that we were already doing for several years more open to anybody that would be interested. So in a nutshell, ICEER's Academy is a project that aims to provide tips, tools, and information to increase the safety of how we use plant medicine and psychedelics in a Western context.
Hmm. And you offer two main courses, the one we're going to talk about today, the integration course, and then the other one, which you just kind of explored around the increasing the safety of ayahuasca and I guess other plant medicines, but with a key focus on ayahuasca, the safety of those sessions in non-traditional context, which Geronimo was on previously to talk about a handful of times. Um, Now, you alluded to it just a moment ago when you talked about the integration service that ICEERS offers. But before we start getting into exactly, the bulk of our discussion on integration, give us a sense of where this knowledge and experience is coming from. Like you're going to speak to, okay, so pardon the phrasing here, but you're about to speak about, psychedelic integration. Well, like, what do you know? How did you get to the things that you're going to share with us? Where did that knowledge and experience come from?
That's a very good question, and I think a very important one, because nowadays it is very common to hear people talk about integration, psychedelic therapy, but not so often we can understand where that knowledge comes from. Why they say the things that they say, where have they learned the things. And when I start my courses and my classes and my teachings, I always like to share that background, because I do think that's very important. Mostly because there's not one way of working, one right way of working. When we talk about psychedelic therapy, psychedelic integration, shamanic practices, we have a diversity of practices. So it is not that we believe that our way of doing things is the right way of doing things, or my way of practicing integration is the right way of practicing integration, but it's just one way that comes from a given context. So the context in which my experience in integration grew has been quite diverse as well. So on the one hand, um, where it all started was at Boom Festival 2008, 2010, where I met Ben Delonen, and we were working in that service that's called Cosmic Care, which is, I guess that for the American audience, similar to Zendo, like the psychedelic emergency support service that works in a recreational context, particularly at Boom Festival. So I was volunteering there, and I volunteered for many years. I've been working at Cosmic Care in different roles, as a volunteer, as a team leader, as a trainer, as a mentor for therapists and volunteers. So supporting difficult situations, that is something that has been part of my experience. So seeing how psychedelic experiences can turn really, really challenging. In a week working at Cosmic Care, you see some of the most intense psychedelic trips that you can imagine. So that is like a psychedelic boot camp training sort of platform. So that is one thing, that harm reduction approach for recreational users, that has informed very much the way that I understand how to support people, in a way that is non-judgmental, in a way that is focused on supporting what is already happening, without focusing too much on why it has happened, or why people took the decision that they took. That is one thing. The other main context in which integration was something that I started to get more acquainted with was ICEERS. The integration service was not something that we created thinking that we had to offer that. It was more a request that we got from people. So what we found very early on was that people were writing to the ICEERS email, sharing their difficult experiences. I've gone to Peru, I did this dieta, I drank with the shaman, I've had this bufo experience, whatever, and I've had some problems. Can you help me? And me being the only psychologist, the clinical psychologist back then in the foundation, it was my role to answer those emails. So in a way, we started providing integration services without calling that integration yet. We had people that were in need of support. We were supporting them because we felt that that was a service to the community that we had to do. And then later on, that became the integration and support service. And then we formally offered that service that we were giving. So this would be the two initial situations. And then something that has informed very much my work has been my training in holotropic breathwork. Holotropic breathwork is a breathing technique that comes from early psychedelic therapy. It was created by Stan Grof. And in holotropic breathwork, we usually do the whole arch of the experience: preparation, session, and integration. So that gave me quite a lot of experience of working with hundreds of people before the journey, during the experience, and after the experience. Yeah. Then, of course, I also had my own experiences with breathwork. So there was a self-experiential part in that as well. And I also am a regular psychologist and psychotherapist that's done several trainings. So that clinical experience also has informed the way that I practice integration. Yeah. So I would say that mostly these are the main areas where I gathered knowledge. And later on in these last few years, I've been more involved in clinical trials. I was trained by MAPS on the use of MDMA for PTSD, and I've been working quite intensively with psilocybin trials for treatment-resistant depression. And that has given me another perspective as well of different situations, different challenges that can occur when we use psychedelics for therapy. So that would be the main places and contexts where I'm speaking from.
Excellent. Thank you. And just to clarify, when you're talking about the the integration side of ICERS, you were actively facilitating integration sessions with people through that. And that was like another area of your experience development.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry if I have not been totally clear, but I did that from 2012 to 2019. That was my main role at ICERS. And then I started taking on a more teaching role, like writing this integration book, sharing knowledge about integration. And then I've been less active in supporting people at the foundation. Some other people took that role, David Londoño mostly. So I've been not so much involved in the last few years in doing integration at ICERS. I still do it at my private practice, but for 6-7 years, that was something that was what I did at ICERS.
Excellent. Thank you. So let's get into that then, psychedelic integration. Now, I know that the course, at least from my read of it, seems like it is something that could be quite applicable to people who are just people taking journeys and looking to increase their ability to integrate in general or want a better understanding, but also especially for people who present themselves as practitioners of integration, therapists, coaches, etc. So on the practitioner side of things. And I have a lot of practitioners that do listen to the show, but I think it's fair to assume most people who are listening aren't psychotherapists or integration coaches. They're just regular old folk just looking to make better or make good out of otherwise difficult experiences. So as I ask you these questions, include what you need to include to feel like you answer the question fully, but kind of keep it geared towards more on the journey or side of things, to the degree to which you think it's appropriate or even accessible. And with that, what is psychedelic integration?
That's a very good question, and there's not one simple answer for that. I always give a similar answer when asked this question, is that I tend not to directly answer this question, because many times defining in a very short or specific way what psychedelic integration is becomes a very biased answer, and then we're missing out other things that could also be included under the label of psychedelic integration. Maybe the only thing that we could all agree about what is integration is that that's what we do after the experience. Yeah. So after a psychedelic experience, those activities, those things that we do or that we don't do, that would have an impact on how we integrate our experiences. So when trying to answer or to define integration, I've taken a more somehow nuanced or complex approach, trying to define different aspects that integration can imply, or different angles on which we can look at integration. So, and that goes with the first part of your question, that this is not only aimed for therapists, but the way that I tried to imagine and understand integration is something that I've tried to make it as accessible as possible, because in a way, many times integration doesn't need to be a clinical intervention, a therapeutic intervention. Integration can be something that we do on our own without the support of a professional. Yeah. So, and that's actually most of the times. So it is actually important to make integration more accessible for lay people, not just for therapists. Yeah. So in my approach of defining integration, I define it through mostly three different axes. One would be what I call the metaphors for integration. So that is providing different metaphors that illustrate different aspects of what integration can be. And we can go into that if you want at some point. But just to give you a couple of examples, we could understand integration as a tree that grows deep into the soil with the roots and high into the sky. Yeah. Or understanding integration as planting seeds, as the experience, psychedelic experience being a seed, and then what we do in integration, somehow taking care of that seed for it to allow to grow and bear fruit. Yeah. So because in different situations, integration will take different forms. So having just one fixed definition can be too narrowing. And metaphors can be very useful to provide a very expansive, a very wide container for things to evolve in their own path and their own pace. Yeah. So different times we might be using different metaphors to understand our own process of integration. Sometimes it will be more a cognitive thing. Sometimes it will feel more like something unfolding and growing. Yeah. So metaphors are a really useful way to depict different angles of what can be integration. So that would be one of the axes. The second one is what I call the dimensions of integration. Integration, most of the times we think about integration in cognitive terms, like understanding, giving meaning to the experience, interpreting the symbols, creating a narrative, but that is just one of the dimensions of integration. I talk about 7 dimensions of integration and how we can look for tools that would address these different dimensions. Yeah. And then the third axis would be the what I call scenarios and needs. And that is mostly 2 different and very different situations. Integration can be mostly aimed to maximize the benefits after a positive experience. That's usually what it looks like. But integration could also be what we need to do in order to stabilize somebody or help somebody deal with challenging experiences that have occurred after a psychedelic journey. And these 2 different scenarios are quite different in terms of the interventions that are needed. Yeah, so what is useful in one case might not be useful in the other one. So I try to make this distinction. For me, all of that is integration, but sometimes the activities and even the person that can do that process is different in both of these cases. So the metaphors, the dimensions, and the needs and scenarios, that will be the ways in which I try to define integration in a complex and in a way that could be comprehensive.
Hmm. Well, with that shared, that what are these 7 dimensions of integration?
Yeah, with no particular order, we have the spiritual dimension, cognitive dimension, emotional dimension, physical dimension, like our body, the behavioral dimension, and then the social and time dimensions. Those are the 7 dimensions that I talk about.
Hmm. I feel like, okay, so we have, can you help me list it again? We have the psychological dimensions, emotional dimension. Wow, my short-term memory, very poor, apparently. I guess
Well,
there's
if
some
you
near the
imagine
end.
a body of a person, we have a mind, we have emotions, we have a physical body. Yeah, so that would be like the intrapsychic sort of dimensions. 3 dimensions. Then we do things. Yeah, so we have behavior. That would be the 4th dimension. Then we have our connection with transcendent experiences. That would be the spiritual dimension. And we are also social beings. So we integrate experiences in our social container. That would be the social dimension, the 6th one. And then we do the integration in time. Integration is something that is dynamic. It moves through time. So that would be the last dimension, so to speak.
Ah, that's good. In helping me clarify my own question, or well, in responding to my struggle in asking the question, you answered the very question I was struggling to answer or, ask. So thank you for that. Now, You're a psychotherapist. How is psychedelic integration related to psychotherapy? Are they the same? Like, is psychedelic integration just like a form of psychotherapy? Or are they different? Are they complementary? Do they kind of belong in separate camps? Like, how would you describe this sort of like comparisons and contrast between psychedelic integration as a thing and then psychotherapy as a thing?
That's a very good question. And I've actually tried to go a little bit deep into this question because I believe it is not helpful if we don't try to make a distinction. In the last few years, we have seen how integration and psychotherapy have become somehow the same thing, but I don't think they are. So, in my definition of integration, I spent a significant amount of time trying to differentiate between psychotherapy and integration. Of course, that these differences are not, I mean, these are not totally independent concepts. Yeah, there are some intersections between integration and psychotherapy. But I think that integration, it is not a psychotherapeutic process. Integration is a process that is focused on a specific event, that psychedelic experience. Yeah. So in many psychotherapy schools and modalities, they have a more open or broad um, I don't know, interest. No, they could be talking about childhood. They could be talking about psychological patterns. They could be talking about trauma, and sometimes it's an open-ended sort of process in which the objectives are not clear and the length of the process is not clear, and where are we going is not entirely clear. Integration, I think that is different. Integration can be a therapeutic intervention. So some of the things that we might do in that intervention can be similar to what we do in therapy, but the focus and the aim is somehow focused on the psychedelic experience. Once we have solved whatever need the person has regarding that experience, it's my belief that integration should finish, or we should reformulate what we're doing to have clarity about what's going on. I think that the question of is this integration or is this psychotherapy is more important for the practitioner than for the client. So because many times some people start a process as integration and then it shifts into a psychotherapy process. And for me, it is extremely important to be aligned with what the client, the person that wants to work with me, with their objectives. Maybe they didn't sign up for psychotherapy. They just had a difficult experience and they want support in solving that experience, but without me getting in other aspects of their life. And for me, it's extremely important to be respectful of that. That's why I understand integration as an intervention that is limited in time, that it's limited in the objectives that it has, and that it should finish. We should be able to say when we finished our intervention in integration. Because integration can continue without being in therapy. Actually, most of us, we integrate our experiences without going to therapy, and we're still doing our integration. So we should be pretty clear that integration can happen even if there's not a single therapist involved. Actually, that would be the ideal scenario. In my approach to integration, what I aim for is that we do what is needed so the person doesn't feel that they need me anymore, that they can continue the integration process on their own. That would be my objective. Yes, like, all right, I think that I got it. I can continue working with this experience on my own. I don't need to continue doing therapy sessions. Yeah, so that's the way that I approach integration, how to help people recover balance, how to help people recover the sense of control or agency on their own process so they can continue on their own. And that for me is important because, at least in my values, that's the way to stay aligned with the psychedelic values. We always talk about how psychedelics, they show us that the healing is inside of us and it's a self-directed process and we don't need an expert on the outside. If then in the integration / therapy or whatever you're doing there, you're shifting those principles and you as a practitioner, you're becoming the doer, the expert, and the one directing the process, I think that we are misaligning ourselves with these psychedelic values.
Yeah, I like that. You discussed integration as being this sort of complex and very nuanced thing, and that out of all this complexity, there's one thing that we can all generally agree is, a fundamental aspect of integration is it's something that happens after the psychedelic experience. And yet, from what I understand, how we prepare for that psychedelic experience has a significant impact on integration. Can you talk about the dynamic between preparation and integration, what role preparation plays in our integration, and maybe even, vice versa, if we're doing multiple journeys over time, what role our integration plays in our preparation? Just talk about that dynamic a little bit.
Yeah, I think this is extremely important, and in fact, that's where my attention is going more in these last years. Yeah, so I focused a lot on integration because my work took me there. I was working at ICERS, and that's what people were asking of me, and that's when I went deep into integration. But I think that preparation is more important and still very little defined of what is a good preparation and what should we do in preparation. What is clear to me is that one of the main factors that has an impact on having a challenging time in integration is the lack of preparation. Insufficient preparation, bad preparation, or not taking preparation into account. That is usually a common factor amongst most of the difficulties that I have encountered through the years that people have reported to me. So in my definition or description of the challenges that are more common after difficult experiences, the first category that I talk about is lack of preparation. So why did this person experience difficulties in integration? Because there was a lack of preparation. What preparation? Then we can talk about more detailed aspects, but lack of preparation is at the base of many difficulties in integration. And I think that we should not lose sight of this. Nowadays, there's this tendency of understanding psychedelic therapy or psychedelic healing more as events. Yeah, I went to the jungle, I drank ayahuasca, and this happened. I went to this clinical trial, I took psilocybin or 5-MeO-DMT, and this happened. I took MDMA, and my trauma was healed. Yeah, so because that is good headlines for media. Like psilocybin heals depression, MDMA is a cure for PTSD. That is good for a headline, but this does not illustrate what happens in reality. Reality is that psychedelic therapy is a process. It's an unfolding process that usually expands beyond what happens in preparation and what happens in integration. There's somebody that is journeying through all this process. And if we lose sight that we're working in a process, then we're not understanding what's going on. And we're focusing on things that might not be that relevant. We're focusing maybe too much on what's happening during the experience and attributing all the importance on what happens during the experience. But we're not taking into account where does this person come from and where is this person going. Yeah. So for me, my next projects have to do with defining more preparation. What is good preparation? What does somebody need to be prepared? What does it mean to be prepared for an experience? But definitely, these are something that is related. And many times, and this is something very beautiful that we see in clinical trials, as you said, the boundaries between what is integration and what is preparation sometimes are kind of blurry when we are in a process in which multiple experiences will happen. Yeah, in this last clinical trial that I've been working in, we had from 2 psilocybin experiences up to 4 psilocybin experiences. So of course we had preparation sessions labeled as such, and then we had integration sessions, but then we would have another dosing day, and then some more integration, and then those integration sessions in between, they became some sort of integration / preparation for the next. And then we somehow renegotiate and reevaluate what we are doing, what is working, what is not, what is needed to go to the next experience in a more kind of prepared way or more open way. And then maybe after the third experience, we look back and we do an integration of the sequence of the 3 experiences that they have had. And somehow that makes sense when looking back, that maybe just right after the first experience, it did not make sense. So I think that this is something extremely important to focus on. What is good preparation and how to do preparation for basically two things. I think that the role of preparation is to maximize the possibility of a safe experience and a meaningful experience. So if you ask me what is preparation for, it's for safety and for meaning. And most of the times it is more important to do a good preparation, and then there will be not a lot of need for integration. I've done preparation processes with people of around 5-6 sessions. Then they went and had their ayahuasca retreat or whatever experience they were going to have. And then they came back for the integration. And with a couple of integration sessions, they felt that that was enough. They didn't need many more integration sessions. So I think that if we do a good preparation, people feel ready, people go to the experience and they are well supported, they have a good experience, then integration will be much more flowing and easy, and we would not encounter challenges there.
Yeah, that's very interesting. And also comes back to what you're saying about the time dimension, depending on the sort of, whatever sort of lens or scale of time, you could see that, like you said, multiple journeys, their integration is also preparation that on a whole becomes its own kind of like arc in the process of our journey with a particular medicine over time and over multiple sessions that is its own sort of block or piece of something to integrate. And something else is, relative to when this is coming out, because this is going to come out pretty quickly after recording to help promote your psychedelic integration course, is that I recently got wind of an organization here in Canada that has been doing these group sessions and is now running some clinical research that will be unfolding through multiple organizations where individuals who are healthy, well, it's like they're not individuals with some sort of condition that the research is trying to see can psychedelics, psilocybin in particular, treat this. It's, what happens when healthy people undergo this sort of community-targeted process where it's most of the time it's like 8 weeks of preparation sessions before the actual journey and then some less amount of integration. Their premise is that if the preparation is very well done, and in the preparation, a key aspect of it is not only preparing the individual, but creating a sense of interpersonal safety, because those 8 weeks of sessions are with the same individuals you're going to be journeying with, that the need for integration will be substantially less because of the kind of like, I mean, my terminology, but like the how fertile the soil was before you dropped into the psychedelic space together. I mean, my assumption is that, kind of like you said, yes, it will require less integration because the preparation was so sufficient. And even Geronimo, who was on previously, as I said, he mentioned how in traditional communities, there isn't really a lot of need for integration sessions because the ceremonies happens as a part of the culture in the community that you live with, and everyone in some way or another is participating directly or indirectly. And so there's less need for what we here in the, I don't know, the West is kind of a big weird term, but like us West people of the West and global North, define as this like specific thing that happens after the ceremony. So yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I totally agree with this, and that's similar terms that I speak about when talking about the social dimension of integration. I mean, why do we make so much focus on we need to integrate our experiences? Because these sort of experiences are alien to our culture and our daily life. So then we need to make something to bring them into our paradigm. While in a lot of shamanic cultures, everybody knows what that's about. You go to Peru, for example, and in restaurants, you see in the menu, ayahuasca, dieta de ayahuasca. No, and so you go to a restaurant, a regular restaurant, and you can order food that is going to be suitable if you've been drinking ayahuasca or if you just come out of the jungle. Does this mean that the cook or the waiters drink ayahuasca or are interested in that? Not really. We don't know. No, but they are in a culture in which these things are already part of what they're doing. So there's not so much need of for specific integration. Yeah. But we do have a need for bringing home these extraordinary experiences. Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the challenges that we are encountering, and probably this is less and less through the years. Yeah. Now we have more language, we have more structure on how to bring these experiences into a Western paradigm. But for decades, we haven't had much of this. So this is slowly evolving, and now we start having our own ways of understanding these experiences. And with these new challenges come, and I'm sure that with Geronimo, you've talked about this, of how do we develop practices that are native to where we are, like how do we do our own rituals, how do we do our community experiences, and without having to steal from people from other cultures, like this extractivist approach that somehow has happened over the last years, of a lot of Western apprentices going there, learning the art in the Amazon, and then coming to Europe, to Barcelona, and practicing in an Amazonian way. Like this is still like early stages of our relationship with these plants and these tools, I believe. So.
Okay, so let's take a little pause from the interview here, as I do. And I'd like to give a big thanks to my patrons on Patreon. They are who make this podcast possible on the financial end, and in some ways on the motivational end. It is both lonely and can be economically, financially quite challenging to be a small-time content creator in a highly niche field, producing content that is very long form and admittedly hard to listen to passively. It is because of people like my patrons who choose to voluntarily fund this show that is otherwise offered for free that I am able to earn a living doing this thing that I love. And I couldn't be more grateful. Thank you very much. The people whose names are listed on the screen here on YouTube are people who give quite a bit, some of which for a long time, and the name in the credits on the screen or in the description is an extra thank you for that. If you listening find value in this show, imagine it's kind of like a busking performance. If you've ever been on the street and someone is doing like a magic show or flow arts or playing music, they offer it for free. And the hope is that if you find value in it, you're willing to reach in your pocket and throw them a little tip for the experience you got to have. In many ways, that's what the podcast does here. In many ways, that's what I do here. That's how I earn a living, is I make this thing and I say, hey, did you like it? Toss me a tip. If you'd like to toss me a tip, you can do so through PayPal, one time, or cryptocurrencies if you're still into that thing. And links to do that are in the description to the episode. If you want to say, hey, I like what you're doing and I'd like to help contribute to a sort of a more reliable sort of foundation for the investments necessary in both time and money in software, hardware, etc. And you want to say, hey, I'm going to toss you a tip every month for some amount of time to your choosing. Well, Patreon is the way to do that. It's like becoming a member, perhaps. The member of my semi-exclusive club of people like yourself who care about this kind of content, care about the work that I'm doing, care about me as a person doing the work while trying to survive in the economically uncertain world, I recognize. And that would be great if you could become a patron. Links to that are also in the description to this episode. If you are not with any kind of financial capacity support, totally get it. People who can do, and so we all get a podcast. If you want to provide some non-financial support, you can comment, like, share. I'm sure you know this. We're all social media savvy. We're all savvy to the social media algorithms and how they work now. So that's a great way to do it. Same with signing up for my newsletter or any of my social medias, Substack, so forth. And that's linked in the description as well. I think that's it. I think that's all. Thank you so much. Let's get back into the interview with Marc Aixalà right now. What are some of the common mistakes people make with integration, in understanding what integration may be or not be? I know you already talked about the sort of common mistake of seeing these journeys as events rather than processes, which fit inside of larger processes, which is kind of contextualized by us living from birth to death as a kind of ongoing process of being. I'll add the other level of like and each of us are smaller pieces inside of a larger moving whole of life under a larger process that exists well beyond our individual birth and death. I'm putting that on you. You don't have to take it. But what are some of the common mistakes people make? These can be mistakes made by facilitators, or they could be mistakes made by the individuals themselves.
Yeah, that's something that I have not formalized in language that often, but I think that we could describe different mistakes in according to different dimensions. One would be of how much we do. I think one mistake is not paying attention to integration, like not having time, not having space to be in contact with experience, allowing ourselves to really calm down from the experience, be relaxed for at least one day afterwards, be able to reflect, journal, paint, walk, meditate, whatever. Like not creating this space, I think, is a common mistake. And this is a mistake that journeyers can do, and facilitators sometimes they do as well. So it is common to have profound experiences, and psychonauts and people that do self-experimentation, they have a lot of deep experiences. But it is less common that we take some time the day after to sit with that, to write about it, to spend some time, I don't know, creating something that will be a witness of the experience that we've had. And if we don't do
like
that,
an artifact.
Or it could be a writing, a painting, I don't know, anything that will remind you, that will be a place to come back to and to reconnect with your experience. If we don't do that, chances are that the experience will fade away in shorter time than we might think. This is sometimes like dreams, that when you wake up, they seem very clear, but then after a couple of hours, you lost them and you don't remember the dream anymore. So I think psychedelic
Right. But if you write them down when you first wake up, then there's a better likelihood they can remember them. Yeah.
Exactly. So spending that time to fix that experience, it will make it much easier to go back to the experience in time. And then we can take, 2 years to integrate our own pace if we want. And then insights can be coming slowly from that experience. But if there's not been this initial effort, so to speak, or this time devoted to do some integration practice, it's very difficult that we can recover something from that experience. So that would be the first mistake. And then what facilitators do sometimes is that they don't provide this space for their the people that attend their workshops, or they provide that space in a very kind of superficial way. All right, so let's sit here in a circle and let's share experience. Okay, let's go. And then you do it in a way that it's not very meaningful, and that doesn't add much to it. Same thing as painting mandalas or writing or whatever. I mean, if you don't put an intention, if you don't create some sort of even a ceremony around it, like really devoting time and intention to do that, and then it doesn't matter if you tell people to paint or to write or to share, it's not going to be done with the intention that is needed. So that would be one of the main mistakes, like not doing what could be done, and that would make things much better. On the other hand, the other mistake would be doing too much and focusing too much on the integration. I need to do my integration. Have you integrated your experience yet? Have you gone to integration sessions? Like try to rush integration as if integration was something that you could do something and then check, done. I've heard sometimes people say, I've done my integration. I've integrated that already. Well, I'm not so sure. I think that experiences can evolve in time, and we can continue integrating an experience that happened 10 years ago, but we can still distill information and knowledge from that experience. So that would be another mistake, in my opinion, to consider integration as a closed sort of drawer. Okay, experience integrated, let's go to the next. No, because experiences are in a continuum. So leaving them somehow open to continue resonating with them, I think it's part of what's important. Then what some of the mistakes, and we are going now into something that can turn into being problematic, is that some facilitators, therapists, shamans, the leader of the ceremony, takes a too active stance in the integration phase. in the immediate integration phase. So right after the experience, or in the sharing circle, or the day after the experience, making interpretations, making I don't know, suggestions, or telling people what they have to do, or like taking too much of an active stance in the process of the other person, that can be very disruptive. I have worked with people that came to me asking for integration of a difficult experience, and when exploring the difficult experience, what was surprising is that the actual experience was not difficult. They had a normal journey, insights, emotions, maybe some tears, whatever, but they did not consider the journey problematic. Problems came in the sharing circle, for example, that the facilitator said something, well, what happens to you, what this journey means to you is this, this, and that, or what you should focus on this next month would be this, this, and that. And those words said at that moment, when the person is open, vulnerable, receptive, we can talk about neuroplasticity, or however you want to imagine that. That can have a profound impact to the point of erasing the experience, and that the person is left just with the words, or just with this last sort of interaction. And I've worked with a handful of people in this situation. So as a practitioner, as a facilitator, we do have responsibility in what we say and do after our participants have been in these deep journeys. Yeah, so that is a relatively common mistake.
Yeah, your discussion there around I think I had heard, maybe it was in the IS safety course, a reference to a phrase, something like interpretation is treason, or something like this, or like the imposition of interpretation is actually a violation that a facilitator can do upon their client. And one thing that I have used when I've been working with people who are, have asked for my support and integration, is talking about how we have to be careful not to let somebody else like give birth to the pregnant wonder too soon by interpreting our experiences for me or for us. And so that's why we have to be cautious about who we talk to about our experiences, and when we talk to them relative to the time frame or amount of time in, or meaningful time in, that we've given our own experiences before we start talking to them. That the sort of the gem, the precious gem of the journey can be tarnished even by well-meaning hands, just because of the interpretive lens, intended or otherwise. And so I like that you brought that up.
Yeah, and these experiences are something that's precious. We don't do this that often. This is something that's special, and it should be treated as something special. That's why preparation is important, to kind of make something special. I mean, think about anything that's special in our lives. We do something before to really make sure that we get there in the best conditions. And then when it's happening, we treat it as something important. We take pictures, and afterwards we talk about that. We share the pictures. I mean, there's paying attention to important events. And one way of not honoring these experiences is by sharing them in contexts that are not supportive, even if they are well-intentioned. You're sharing with your brother, your family, whatever your deep experience, but you're doing it in a moment in which they cannot hear you, they cannot support you, and they just make a dismissive comment, not because they mean any harm, but they just, you shouldn't worry that much about these internal things, that you should go out more and have more relationships with people, or whatever. No? Like they are saying it from a good place, but probably that's not what you need to hear to sort of honor that experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I once had a conversation with a colleague who helps in these kinds of situations as well. And we talked about the difference between interpretation and reflection, that there is quite a lot of value as someone, as even if you are accidentally put in a place of being someone's integration support person because they're talking to you about their experiences, to reflect what you see, like, it sounds like that sounds like you're talking about this as if it were really meaningful to you, or like, I could see that experience looks like it was quite important, or I could see your experience a lot of distress or sadness about this. To reflect back, like reflecting, as opposed to, oh, you're making a big deal out of that, or so like the subtle difference between these things. I mean, mind you, I'm imposing my own ideas here. I don't know if you feel the same way, or.
Well, I would be a little bit more nuanced about this, because some reflections could also come from our own interpretation of what's going on, and we could be reflecting what
Yeah.
we're seeing because of my personal bias, But I get the idea of what you're saying, and I do agree with the core of it. My language for this is that interventions in integration should help people amplify the meaning rather than reduce the meaning. So if my interpretation or my reflection or my comment or my suggestion is going to be something that narrows down the possibilities of the experience, that is not doing any service to the person. So what you have experienced, it means this. I'm kind of narrowing the possibilities there. So in my opinion, that is not useful. But if we can find a way that amplify, and wow, so this sounds awesome, and what else could this mean? What other ways could we look at it, and what other meanings could this have? No, we're giving it more room, more space, so it can grow and it can evolve in whatever direction it needs to go. Yeah. So for me, the trick is expansion versus reduction. Yeah.
Mm. Yeah, one of the ways that I have observed this sort of unintended reduction versus expansion is when the lens that people, like facilitators, coaches, give an experience is to overtly psychologize it, or in reverse, overtly spiritualize it, where we're kind of like being like, oh, this is a particular way of seeing it, I'm going to impose it upon it. And then you lose maybe the spiritual aspects of an experience because you're thinking about too much how it might relate to this traumatic experience that I went through with my mother. And that's why the angel was female, or something like this, or to overtly spiritualize it and be something to the effect of like, oh, wow, you had contact with the angels. And it's probably because they're giving you a spiritual message to, or something like this. Yeah.
Mm, absolutely, and the example that you make, it's very similar to the examples that I place when I talk about these different dimensions of integration, and how we can be biased in different directions. We can be very reductionist with the spiritual dimension, as it sometimes happens with scientific approaches. They don't like so much spiritual language, and they try to explain spiritual experiences through psychological language, and that's a reduction. But sometimes in some shamanic or new age contexts, we find an overemphasis on spiritual explanations, and then everything is spiritual, and then your traumas are not your traumas; they are due to I don't know, an entity or an energy or who knows what. Like, to give a spiritual explanation to everything. I think that is a bias as well, and that's a reduction that goes only in this direction. So that's why keeping in mind these different dimensions and see how could I look at these things from these different dimensions can help us have this more expansive approach to integration rather than focusing just on one of the dimensions.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, with an understanding of just the wide range of sort of, I mean, possible styles of intervention or practices or metaphors that, right, that might go into integration, what exactly is involved with this? Like, what are some of the things that we might be doing? And are there like certain time points post journey where certain practices are more advantageous than others? I know you already spoke to like creating a space shortly after, the day after, to rest, to write, reflect, make art. I don't know if you said do yoga, but like just, it seems like what you're speaking to is there are certain practices that really thrive immediately after the journey. What about further after, longer after? Talk to me about the different practices and where they're best suited relative to when the
Yeah.
journey takes place.
And you're right on point again. When I talk about the time dimension of integration, I like to distinguish between what I call immediate integration, which is what happens hours and a day or 2 days after the experience, and then long term integration. For immediate integration, we're talking about, landing softly, recovering the body, sleeping, eating, hydrating, having a relaxing time, maybe drawing, painting, yoga, nature, sharing circles, these classic sort of things that can be offered after an experience. It is extremely important to have time to finish well the process. Yeah. So one of the things that happens in the language of the holotropic breathwork tradition, if we don't pay attention to this immediate integration, is that we may end up in what we call not reaching closure. We have not completed the experience, and then somehow something is open and it's lingering there, and it's going to be probably bothering us further along the week or the month or whatever. So taking time to finish, to reach closure, that is extremely important. For that, there are plenty of activities, all these things that we've said, from yoga, nature, meditation, painting, singing, I don't know, whatever. We can be really creative with that. What is important is to propose this as options, not as obligations. So now everybody needs to sing because the voice is really important to reach closure or to integrate your experience. I don't think that it works like that. When we create integration practices, they should be open. They should be something that people can engage with whatever works best for them at that moment. For somebody, it might be going into writing in a more kind of cognitive way, creating this trip report. For somebody, it might be painting. For somebody, it might be going for a walk or swimming in the swimming pool or the ocean, or listening to music or meditating, or who knows. Yeah, but what's important is that there's this time and space and the possibility and the materials, the options to go into these practices. Yeah, so at least that's my approach to integration. We propose certain activities, but we don't impose anything in particular. Yeah. For that, one needs a certain preparation. You need to bring the materials. You need to have an idea of how you're going to create that integration time. Usually, after I facilitate holotropic breathwork experiences, when I do longer workshops, I devote a full morning to integration. And then I come with plenty of materials to have options so people can choose what they want to do. Of course, it helps to do the workshop in a place that's beautiful, that you have nature options as well, that, I don't know, you can swim in the river or the ocean or a swimming pool, you can go for a walk in the woods. All these things will enhance the possibility of having a more meaningful time and space for integration. So these are the activities that I would suggest for this immediate part of the integration. Most of the time, these activities will continue to work well if we have not had challenges in our experience. So if writing, meditating, reflecting about the experience, doing yoga, listening to music has worked in the immediate phase, most likely it will be something that will continue help you to reconnect with experience. And then maybe will come the time to introduce certain behavioral changes to, I don't know, have that conversation that you have not had in a long time, or, I don't know, start modifying your habits regarding food, or who knows. Yeah, but maybe there will come a time to start acting on those insights, those things that we have learned during the experience. And that usually comes in the longer term integration. Yeah. Maybe then you want to talk with a therapist because you want to do a couple of sessions. Maybe you want to join these integration circles that happen sort of peer-to-peer integration, or you want to enroll in a martial arts class because that's a way to, then these things can become tools for long-term integration as well, So, and of course, if there have been challenges and problems, then we should go to a professional, to a specialist that can help us to resolve that as soon as possible, because then we will transition into a more smoother phase of integration and we will continue on our own. Yeah. So I do think that there are key points in integration, but mostly is reaching a good closure. So we end up in a stable place, and then we will find our path for sure.
So with this discussion of like there being key points, that kind of sort of already answers my next question of like, are there sort of critical windows where we might lose an opportunity to properly integrate certain things? It seems like, at least in the immediate integration, there is a critical window of like, we're in that transition phase between being like deeply in the experience and kind of back to normal life. And it has a pretty defined time window, hopefully for most people, that extends for a very long time. We're looking at a problematic situation. Like a mania or something to this effect. But like for most people, that ends. So there is that critical window that you want to give yourself the sort of the best possible opportunities there. But then you talk about, well, once that's closed, okay, then there's this time dimension, and there's all these other things you could be following up on, or maybe trying to deepen your understanding with, and so on and so forth. But is is there such a thing as being too late to integrate a psychedelic experience? Like, I mean, this could be positive or could be negative. Like you mentioned, I mean, positive, negative, like an easeful experience that you have a like good relationship with, or an experience that was not easeful and you're still struggling with. Is there at a certain point at which, like, yeah, you're probably not going to be able to go back and do much with that now? You should have worked on it earlier? Or is it kind of like, hey, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, if you're still struggling or you're still hadn't done anything, you can go back to these experiences and still make something out of it in a good way?
Yeah, that's a complex question, and I'm trying to find a way on how to provide some clarity about it. I think that I refer to the last thing we're talking about, the immediate integration. If that has happened, then I think it's going to be easy to come back to it at any point if needed. Yeah. If the experience has been positive, if we have done what we could in the immediate integration phase, most likely there will not be the urge of, I have not done what I should go back, I need to, like, recover the wasted time. I don't think that we will experience it that way. It will feel much more natural, in which things are evolving at its own rhythm. And then maybe some months or years later, we get another insight from that experience. And, wow, I can look at it from this perspective as well. And this also is telling me something in this moment that I'm living now. And then it becomes something more natural, that it unfolds at its own pace. A metaphor for this would be this idea of planting seeds. You planted a seed, you took care of the seed started growing, and it becomes, I don't know, a tree. And the tree eventually gives you an apple, and then you eat that apple. So you're not focusing that much on the seed that you planted back then and how it looked like and how it was and the process of planting the seed. You're eating the apple and seeing how things have evolved from there, So in that sense, I think that it is not too late to integrate anything, because things continue moving, we continue living. If we have had a difficult experience and we've been dealing with symptoms, I don't know, like rumination, fears, anxiety, whatever, that have appeared because of the experience, again, I don't think it's never too late to work on that, but sometimes there will have happened things in between that will make it more difficult to go out of that. So, for example, it's relatively common to experience certain anxieties or ruminations or fears after a particularly difficult experience. If that is addressed relatively early on, usually it brings no complications. Like, you just process.
Now, when you say
that
early on, are you talking weeks, months?
Yeah, weeks, months. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But if that's something that's happened many months before, or years, and you've done like pharmacological treatment with anti-anxiety medication, and that has started affecting your daily life and the things that you do, you have gone into some avoidance behaviors not to get that anxiety, you've started using alcohol, I don't know, to repress that anxiety, then we have added problems, added layers to the problem, and then it might be more difficult to do a classic integration approach with just the content of the experience. Yeah. So generally speaking, I would say that it's never too late to do the integration, but if things have gone well, people will not most likely feel the need to do something, because that will be probably in the right place already. And if people have challenges, they have been experiencing those challenges since that day. So it's very present still. So it's not going to be difficult to recover the fear, the anxiety, the rumination. That's going to still be there, So, yeah.
But there'll be extra layers kind of that you have to sort through, based on how long it's been, extra layers you have to sort through before you can get all the way back to the sort of the triggering event.
Yeah, because then sometimes what we need to do to dismantle is these layers, So, for example, people that have very difficult experiences, and then they experience that with some degree after some weeks or months of depersonalization or derealization. Maybe they go and they take some antidepressants or medications that the psychiatrist provides. Then we enter a a psychiatric treatment, and maybe they start living their lives in a different way because they're feeling this depersonalization and this derealization. They don't go out so much. Their social life starts to diminish. Their job starts to suffer because of that, or the family relationships, they become more complicated. So then when this person comes to work with you, it's not just the initial feelings of depersonalization and derealization. We have all these things that they have done to try to cope with that many times they add layers of complexity. Now we have to deal with how difficult it is with being lonely because I have not gone out with my friends for a couple of years and they don't call me anymore, so I feel isolated. And that's really happening. They are really isolated. So you have more complexities that have happened because of the chronification of that problem. Yeah.
In what ways does integration, I guess, I mean, you've spoken a bit directly to it and around it. Between sessions going well, I guess I'm going to clarify this and not dance around it too much. What specific things are necessary, or we'll say like strongly useful in a scenario where the experience the person is trying to integrate is was deeply troubling, is deeply troubling, or outright traumatic, right? Like, I assume it's not yoga and meditation, right? So what specific interventions are like, oh yeah, these are the ones that we want to bring on board for someone who had a really difficult time and is kind of left in the wake of that?
That's a very good question, and that's a question that I had to answer myself as well, because when I started supporting people through the integration service at ISERS, I didn't have a specific training for that. I was a psychologist, I was a breathwork practitioner, but I did not have any specific therapeutic protocol to use with people in these situations. I was coming more from a perspective of when things have gone well, like in the holotropic breathwork setting, most of the times, or all the times, people are better after the experience than before the experience. So then it's more this scenario of maximizing the benefits, meditation, time in nature, painting, mandala drawing, yoga, whatever. Yeah, and that works beautifully. But one of the things that I discovered early on is that these interventions were not helping people in high distress. Like my active listening, my interpretation from a transpersonal perspective, my compassionate listening was not supportive enough for these people. So I had to look for modalities, therapeutic modalities that would provide tools that could be helpful in these situations. And this is, in my opinion, a radically different scenario than maximizing the benefits. Most likely, a lot of practitioners, people that facilitate sessions, they can provide an integration space that is well done with materials for painting, meditation, whatever. But maybe not all of them can provide these more therapeutic interventions. So usually it's another person that needs to do this integration of difficult experiences. And in my in my experience, these interventions need to be effective. People need to see that this is working in a relatively short time. Yeah, they are in high distress after the experience they had a couple of weeks ago, and they need something that will alleviate the suffering now, not in a year. Not like, okay, trust the process, it will unfold naturally, everything is for a good reason, and it's gonna get better. Well, most likely yes, but they need alleviation now. Yeah. So that was something that I was faced early on in the integration practice, and I had to look for modalities that would allow me to do something to work with more psychological symptoms like rumination, obsessive thinking, anxiety attacks, insomnia, depersonalization, derealization. This kind of mostly anxiety-based reactions or perception-based reactions. And I cannot go into detail about what tools or techniques specifically. That would be something that needs to be explained in the context of how to create a protocol for intervention in each specific case. But in a way, what we're trying to do is find a way to reach that closure that we're talking about. So closure has not happened. Experience remained open, and people are very much in touch with that experience or with the remnants of that experience. Most of the times, they are too anxious or scared to go back and have another experience, which would be a natural way of, okay, let's have another one and see if it resolves the previous one. Many times that is not acceptable for the person. Like, this would be too much. So how do we find in an ordinary state of consciousness a way to resolve the thing that opened in a non-ordinary state of consciousness? And that has been my passion for the last few years. No? I've tried to look for techniques of regular psychotherapy that could be applied meaningfully with a psychedelic lens, with this idea of a non-directive or inner directive, and that people will reach their own resolution. So, and because of the context that I was working in the integration and support service, which we were not charging for our work, and we had a limited number of sessions to provide to each of the persons that would come, it had to be something that would be short, would be focused on the intervention, would provide tools for people to feel that they could alleviate, that they could get some more control on that situation of instability that they were perceiving. What I found very useful, and then I did my own adaptation of that, was the brief strategic therapy from the Palo Alto school. That is something that was created back in the 70s, and that, in my opinion, has some links with the psychedelic treatment. Yeah, it's not 100% linked, but some of the people that developed this form of therapy, they were also knowledgeable in the use of psychedelics. And for me, that was a good tradition to research on and to learn, and then to apply some of its principles in the work in integration.
And that was called, sorry, brief strategic therapy?
Brief strategic therapy. That's the name that's called nowadays, but back then it was the therapy that they did at the MRI, the Palo Alto MRI Institute, Mental Research Institute in Palo Alto.
Okay. So this podcast is funded by patrons on Patreon, and certain sort of, I guess, degrees, certain tiers of involvement. People get sometimes an opportunity to submit their questions, and being that psychedelic integration is something that can be talked about generally, but when it comes down to sort of like brass tacks, it really is specific to each individual in each scenario. I've said, hey, do you have any questions generally or specifically? And I've got a handful of them here. Now, the first one is one that I literally just heard you say it doesn't make sense for you to give specifics on because it's unique to each individual person. But I'll ask it anyways and see if there's anything that you've got to add on top of that, which is any tips for a persistent or ongoing sense of derealization?
Yeah. Well, let's see with how much detail I can answer this. All these things that we're talking about, so we're doing somehow a conversation around most of the topics that appear in the course that I offer. And I talk specifically of how to work with derealization and depersonalization. But in a nutshell, and for the lay person, depersonalization and derealization are very difficult situations to work with and very uncomfortable for the person that's experiencing them. Most of all because other people don't understand what they're talking about. You go to a therapist or to a psychiatrist that has never had the experience of derealization or depersonalization, and they cannot understand why this is bothering you so much. And then they start thinking maybe it's a psychotic sort of thinking, or this is a perceptual problem that people are having, or this is I don't know. They try to find medications, they try to find explanations for what's going on. But truth is that the realization can be a really, really uncomfortable situation, because all of a sudden the world is completely different while being still the same. And you can see both things at the same time. I know that things are the same, but my way of perceiving that is that's completely different. I've even worked with people that they told me that the world was upside down. It's like left was right and right was left. And it's not that they got lost in the street. They could drive their car, but it's almost like they were living in a reflection. Yeah, how do you explain that? It's really, really difficult to explain that and to understand that if you have never experienced it. So, and because the realization and depersonalization in a certain way are perceptual problems, you're perceiving reality in a certain way, therapy cannot try to solve that perceptual problem. Because in a way, it's like if you would hear this tinnitus, people that have this ringing in the ear, that's sometimes a common request for therapy. I have this ringing in my ear. Therapy cannot heal the ringing in the ear. You have that, you're perceiving that. What therapy can help you with is how you relate with that uncomfortable symptom. Same thing with the realization or depersonalization. We cannot change that perception, but we can help the person relate better with what is going on. And many times what will happen is that through improving the relationship with that, then people will not focus so much on this. This is the same with like a bad neighbor. You have a neighbor with whom you're having conflicts. You see him or her all the day. You notice all the noises that they make when he's passing by. But when you have somebody that you have a good relationship with, you don't notice, even if they are there, they come and go, but it doesn't bother you so much. So what happens sometimes with the realization is that through time, it manifests in two main things. One is, to use clinical terminology, obsessive thinking about that. So I am obsessively paying attention to that perception. Am I derealized or not? Am I seeing the world in a normal way or not? And that becomes an obsessive way of processing that problem, which doesn't help. Then the attempt to monitor that becomes the problem itself, because I'm thinking about that all the time. That is one way in which the problem manifests. And the other way is by limiting our interactions with the world, because being derealized in public feels overwhelming, or whatever, each person has their own version of this. Then I tend to isolate more, or to drink more, or to do less of this, or we start living less. Yeah. So then on the one hand, we have an internal problem, which is this obsessive thinking, and then we have an external problem, which is how I engage with the world. So interventions should aim to these two situations, not so much to the perceptual problem, but to the obsessive processing of the problem and this avoidant behavior, so to speak. Many times, as we work with that, the global situation will improve. And what people report is that it's not that the realization or the depersonalization disappears, is that they focus less on that. Even I've heard some patients say that they realize that the realization is something that they had experienced many times before, but it was not a problem. They were perceiving it as, a different state of consciousness or a different way of perceiving the world, but they did not become obsessed or attached to it. Yeah. But then at some point, after a psychedelic experience or whatever, they became really fixated with that. And then this took a greater dimension. Yeah. So many times working with mostly in the initial phases with the obsessive thinking about it, and then on later stages of the integration process on the external manifestation of that, usually diminishes the problem to the level that it's not that people say, I don't have this anymore. People say, it doesn't bother me anymore.
Thank you. All right. So this next one is, does integration, and I'm reading these right off as they were asked, does integration have to take place on the external physical level? I've had some trips that prompt me to create, and others that feel as though I should adapt the way I'm living rather than, say, write or paint. Is that technically still integration?
Yeah, absolutely. And here's what, again, I would refer to what we were talking about before. To have options is what it's important. There's no one way of doing integration. Sometimes it will be by reading a poetry book. Another time will be by talking with a psychologist or a friend or whatever. And another time is going to be journaling or joining a yoga class. And I think that it is integration. At some point, integration becomes life itself. Yeah. So we implement some changes, we start doing something, and that becomes what we do, and that's our life. Am I integrating my experience? Well, yeah, maybe the experience has become integrated already in who you are, and the effects or the ripples of the experience are happening in your life without having to be thinking about the experience itself. So integration can still be happening, even if we're not thinking about the events and the symbols and the things that happened back then, but because we're just living something that developed after that experience. So, yeah, definitely that's still integration, even if you're not creating or doing anything.
I guess also, like to talk about the creative side, integration is response to the journey that we had, right? Or it's like what defines what our integration looks like has a lot to do with, what exactly we experienced in the journey. And what is required for good integration is different if our journey was all about new ways of using color in our artistic practice versus how we feel guilty with the way we aren't answering the phone when our mom calls, right? Like they would ask totally different, and both would require integration, and they would look very different, and both would qualify as integration relative to the
Absolutely.
experience. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it better.
So, this next question looks like it's a two-part question. I think I'm going to read it one part at a time, which is, how do you integrate or hold or orient yourself to other realms which seem so alien and yet familiar?
Hmm. Yeah. I don't know if I have an answer for that, but what comes to mind is that maybe there are things that cannot um, be integrated fully. How do you integrate a mystical experience when you have to go back to work on Monday? You will still have to go back to work on Monday. You will still get angry and pissed because of the, I don't know, taxes or traffic or whatever. You will still have arguments with your family. So I think that there are experiences that they cannot be fully integrated because of the nature of the experience. So if we're talking about an infinite experience and we're trying to integrate in a finite being as we are and limited beings as we are individually, we cannot contain and hold everything all the time. Maybe those experiences can only be fully manifested when we are there, but then when we come back here, we can have the inspiration, we can have the memory, the distant memory of those realms, and that's the most that we can aspire to, and maybe that will remain as an inspiration to move our lives into that direction, knowing that maybe we will never reach that again, or that we will not live in that reality forever. So
Yeah, I think something that comes up for me there is that, like you said, it's like, how does one cannot sort of contain the infinite within the finite. And I'm thinking back to what you said about derealization. It's like, well, you're not trying to address the problem of the derealization. You're in ways like addressing the person who's experienced it, their relationship with that experience and how it's playing out in their life. In a way, it's like, how do we then focus on our relationship to this thing that will forever be uncertain and like beyond our capacity to fully understand or to apply in our lives. And there's maybe a leveraging point there to focus on the relationship to the unintegratable in a way. Yeah.
absolutely, and I like very much that you make this connection, because there is a connection with the topic of the realization and the personalization. At some level, the experience of not being yourself, or that the world is not what it is, it's what spiritual traditions talk about. That you're you, but you're not really you. You're something else, and the world is the world, but it's a veil, and there's something else beyond that. So, there's some spiritual truth, if you want, in the perception of a depersonalized or derealized world. And maybe that is part of what's happening. I don't know. But there's layers in which we can relate to anything, to problems that maybe we relate to that in a different way, and then it's not a problem. It's something else. So yeah.
Hmm. So the second, I think these are actually two totally different questions, but they came together as one, which I think is interesting. Is they say, and I'm going to read this, word for word. Downloads. What about these? Again, how do you think I'm going to change this a bit. How do we integrate these into our understanding of the world? I once had an hours-long overview of interspecies interdependence. I'd never once thought about this or anything similar to it or read about it before that journey. I learned a great deal, certainly, and it without a doubt changed how I looked at other animals, insects, and plants since. There's the off factor, of course, but how to fathom where this comes from is challenging at best to understand. I suppose what these both have in common is both as in the question from before, is the otherworldly nature of these. The extraordinary wide angle views or perspectives are much easier to understand and integrate into this reality. So I guess I'll bring it back to the beginning of that question, like downloads. And I anyone who's had like a big psychedelic experience, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, you get these like downloads of things. How do we work with these?
Yeah. Different things come to mind. One of them is similar to what we've been talking about. Sometimes we cannot integrate everything that we download. Yeah, and if you allow me to make a silly joke, or some of us are from this generation that some decades ago we had Napster and these sort of things that you could download music. Yeah. And a friend of mine made the joke one day that I don't listen to music anymore, I download music. Yeah. So our hard drives, they were filled with albums, the full discography of everybody, but then you don't go on to listen and enjoy the music anymore. No? So sometimes the integration, the healing, the transformation is not in the amount of the download. It's more on the quality, or to focus on something that will be really fruitful. Again, how you integrate the infinite into the finite. Well, maybe we need to focus on something. Yeah. And I think this, and something that Stan Grof said regarding the outcomes of psychedelic therapy. He said in one of his works that the result of a psychedelic experience, the outcome, doesn't have to do so much with the quantity of information that we access or the quantity of psychological material that we process, but it has to do more with the quality of how we end the experience. So the tone in which you end your experience, that's what's going to somehow determine how the overall memory of the journey looks like and how integration will be. So then the focus is not so much on having to integrate and remember everything, is of landing gently, safely, and finishing the journey on, as much as possible, a good tone. It doesn't mean that you need to be happy. You could end up on a sad note, but if it's an embodied, a stable, a kind of, grounded sadness, most likely it's going to be much easier to integrate than if we end up with, a very intense emotion that doesn't allow us to be with what's going on. So, I don't think that we should focus so much on quantity, but more on quality of our psychedelic journeys, and also be humble. We are just human beings, and these are just experiences. So we should not pretend that one single experience is going to radically change me and I'm gonna become somebody radically different and be free of all my suffering and become the best version of myself right after an ayahuasca experience. No, these are tools that we can use along the path that can help us to be more conscious, more aware, be more compassionate, to treat ourselves and others with more kindness, and try to live our lives with as much meaning as possible. And there's no much more than that. And psychedelics are tools to help us in the path, but I don't think that we should focus so much on having to grasp everything. Because in the end we're limited beings. This last Indiana Jones movie, or I don't know if the last or the previous one, something like this happened. No, like the bad guy wanted to download all the knowledge from these aliens or whatever, and what happened to him? He went crazy and exploded, because we cannot hold infinity inside of us. Yeah, so just try to live our lives in the most meaningful way. I think that that's more than enough.
Great. Thank you for that. So I've got one more of these specific questions, then I've got one more general question, and then I'm going to ask you about the course. So with the time frame we've got available, I'll get you to hold that in mind as you answer it. So this is the last sort of specific question. When do I own integration work? I do lots of recollection and journaling, trying to save the precious memories and experiences, and then I revisit those seeings and feelings repeatedly over the years, and I try to find more meanings in them. I also try to pay attention to where things land in my body, so kind of beyond words and images. That's a bit harder, I find. But what about all those myriad things and experiences that happen on any given trip which we don't remember? They're inside of us somewhere, but I'm not sure how to unlock them, or if the basic rule should be you only remember bits you're supposed to remember.
Hmm. Yeah, I would say that the person that wrote this is doing an amazing work. Like it seems that there's a lifetime of journeys that have been recorded and paid attention to, and he or she is definitely doing their work. So, yeah, congratulations for that, and also the fact that there's much more that we cannot grasp, and that many things have happened, and the vastness of the inner landscapes is awesome, and maybe that is also part of what psychedelics teaches. I think it was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel that said that awe is the beginning of spirituality, or the doorway to spirituality. And I think it's a really powerful feeling to be in the presence of awe and see that we cannot grasp everything, and that we will never be able to do that no matter what you do. We always going to be dust specks in an infinite universe, and that's who we are. And to be able to be comfortable with that, and to also experience that awe as a gift. I've seen so much that I cannot remember, that I cannot understand, and to be okay with that, I think that is part of the psychedelic experience as well. Yeah.
Great. So this is the last general question before I ask you about the course, and I'm going to sort of compress what would have been multiple questions, because I think there's, in some ways, you've kind of answered it indirectly, which has to do with the value of having professional support in your integration process. Like it's clear that at any time that we are trying to do a thing, we might be able to do it better if we have some sort of professional support. It's not necessary, but it can be beneficial for positive experiences, or like experiences that went well and closed well, and might be more necessary and significantly necessary if the experiences were negative and could have detrimental effect on you. And so the necessity of professional support there is to kind of like basically interrupt what could be a long phase of sort of like these many layers of harm that could come from the experience. So that, I feel like that's clear. We've talked about that. Now, having a sense of, what the value of having professional integration support is in either of these two camps, how does one get a sense of who is good's maybe not the right word. Like, let's say I'm looking for some integration support, right? It could be different if it's positive or a challenging one. But like, how do I assess that person is going to be like a good fit for me? And are there any red flags that would make me be like, I don't think that person is the right fit for me, or I don't think they're actually doing safe or positive work for people?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good question. Not easy to answer. I would say that the first and most important thing is whatever you're feeling with that person. I think that there are as many therapists as clients. So if your gut feeling tells you that that person is not to be trusted, then don't go there, or stop immediately. So then if credentials or qualifications are important for you, I think it's worth to check where has this person learned, what sort of experience they have, who do they say that their mentors and teachers are. For me, that's always a sign of integrity and being honest. Like, who have you learned from? Who are your teachers? Who could vouch for you if needed? And also the relationship that this practitioner has towards the lineage, if they do belong to a lineage or not, and how do they talk about their teachers or their elders. I think that's always a good sign. Again, it's easy also to fake that and to pretend that one is very connected with a lineage or whatever. No, but I think that that's important. And then, what is this practitioner offering you? What are they promising you? I think that big promises in integration or therapy or any form of support are not a good sign. If somebody's promising anything that sounds like really too far out or too magical or too impressive, I would maybe check with more depth what they really do. And then, at least for me, it's important to know what's your way of working. What are we going to be doing if we do that? What should I expect from our interactions? How long is this integration going to be? How long are the sessions? What will we do in the sessions? I mean, maybe you don't need to be obsessive about that, but to have a general idea that they can explain what is their model of working. For me, that is important. And then maybe this is a more subtle thing that links with some of the first questions that we were talking about, is, how could I say that? I think it's important to work with practitioners that are aligned to what you expect and that will not add more problems than you have. Sometimes you go to a therapist trying to solve a situation, and then you go home with 3 more problems. All of a sudden, you have trauma that you have not processed, you have an attachment style that needs to be worked on, and you have some, I don't know what, that also needs to be worked on. So all of a sudden, instead of having one challenging experience that I need to integrate, all of a sudden I have 3 problems. So if your therapist or practitioner is adding problems that it's going to extend the therapy, or all of a sudden things are much more complicated than they look like, I don't feel so comfortable with that. Sometimes therapists, we can have the tendency to create a need. So if you feel that the integration practice that you're following or what they propose is creating a need, that if you don't do that, you're not doing things right, for me, that is not a good sign. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. Now here's ultimately the final question. The whole crux of this, the whole reason for you being here on the show, is to talk about the upcoming course you're doing through ICEER's Academy of Psychedelic Integration, which listeners can participate in. They can sign up right now if they want it. Maybe we'll give them the opportunity to hear more about what the course, but they could jump in and sign up right away. What is that course? Okay, so what is it? What does it offer? Who is it for? And then the specifics. When does it start? How can people get more information?
All right. Yeah, thank you for that. And honestly, it was not just my intention to promote the course through this conversation. I have enjoyed very much our conversation.
So yes, of course,
yeah.
Yes.
So please, our listeners, don't feel that this has been only a promotional sort of interview. Because
before you answer, let me jump in on that, because I would like to clarify, because I guess a little background for listeners is that, ICEER's has reached out to me. Hey, we're doing this integration course. Would you like to have Marc on the show to talk about it and help promote the course? And I am very conscientious that I never have anyone on the show for a really long commercial for their product or service.
All right.
And the only reason I consented to having you on the show is because I knew that you would be coming to offer really positive, good information that people were going to be able to take away with having just listened to the podcast and get something really positive out of that. And also, there's this course that is likely going to be very positive for them as well. And in case it came off, like you said, kind of came off as a weird salesy thing, mostly because I'm excited to promote the course because I know how great a job you guys do. I've participated in the IS Safety, and I want to really celebrate how, I haven't taken the psychedelic integration course, but I feel pretty confident that it's at the tier that I've come to expect from your team. So that's why I got a little excited about promoting the course, not to give the wrong idea to listeners or put you in a weird position there.
No, I appreciate that, and definitely it was clear for me. So, sorry. So the course, it follows on many of the things that we've talked about today, and it also follows the structure of the book that I wrote, Psychedelic Integration. So the idea is that following the book, we wanted to create something that could be more hands-on, more specific, more practical. So people could understand how to actually implement, how to actually do those integration processes or practices that are described in the book. So what can you expect if you take this course? And there's, I would say, a first part that is more to the general public. So anybody that has interest in non-ordinary states of consciousness, or people that do their own journeys and want to learn more about integration, they will find what we've talked, the metaphors, the different dimensions, the definitions of theoretical paradigms to understand integration. So there's this general definition of what integration is, like a very solid background on how to understand and conceptualize integration, and to make it yours, to own it, not just a description that somebody tells you, but that you find your own way of understanding that. And then there's a second part that it's more focused to learn to support people going through difficult experiences. So then we analyze the different profiles of challenges that people report, and I provide very specific tools, techniques of how to support people in different situations. We also talk about how to structure, how to plan an integration process, the different phases of an integration process, how to, I divide the intervention in 3 phases, what we do in phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3, different things that are important to do in different phases. And then also techniques and protocols and ideas on how to build that integration process from session to session. So the idea is not so much to teach people how to do integration, but as a teacher of mindset, how to think about how you do integration. So my hopes is that when the course ends, people will feel that they have tools to apply to their own way of working. They don't have to convert to my way of working, but that what we share will enrich and will enhance your capacity to support a wider range of people that are having challenges or not challenges, but that you will have a more complex and sophisticated look on how to approach integration, and hopefully that manifests in a very practical way on how you practice integration. We talk about how to use language, we talk about specific techniques and how to use them. I provide examples of how to present these techniques. I give like the exact wording that I use in the sessions, so people can really visualize what my way of working looks like. So it's not just a general description, but they can get a real sense of what happens in the sessions. So we try to make it very practical, very detailed. So that's what you can expect if you take this course. The course is around 30 hours of video recording, and we have weekly calls from January until March. The course is 12 weeks, so there's 12 live meetings of 1 hour and a half each week, in which we can discuss, debate, ask questions, and go more in depth about certain aspects of the videos that we saw each week.
Awesome. And so when does the course start? When does it end? You said 12th January to March. When can people sign up? When can they no longer sign up for that for that matter? Like, there's a window of registration, correct?
Yeah, registrations have started this week. So last week of October, we started with registrations, and they will go on until mid-December, if I'm not mistaken. So before the winter break, Christmas break, the registrations will be open. And the course starts, if I'm not mistaken, the 2nd or 3rd week of January, and then it goes for 12 weeks until March. So roughly speaking, January to March, 12 consecutive meetings.
Awesome. And we will be able to access that course through the iSeers Academy. Is that correct? I'll make sure there's a link in the description to this, like people can jump over there. But it's iSeers Academy, ICEERS, and on the Academy, and then on that page will be a very clear, like, this is the integration course.
Yeah. The registrations are open, and it's very intuitive. You can clearly see where you have to click to get more information, and you have a sample of videos to have an idea of how the videos are going to be looking like. So
Awesome. And the name of your book that you mentioned is Psychedelic Integration, Psychotherapy for Non-Ordinary States. And I understand you can get that through all major book retailers. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. I'll also leave a link to your book in the description for people if the course is not the right fit for them, but they want to dive a little bit deeper into what you're doing. And with that, Marc, thank you so much. This has been a great interview. I feel like I've learned a lot, and I really appreciate what you brought here for the listeners.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the conversation and the pace. I feel that we've gone in relative depth with certain aspects, and we've also covered a nice overview of everything. And I really enjoyed your connections and your ideas. So thank you so much for the invitation. It's been really a pleasure.
Wonderful. Pleasure for me too. And with that, cut. Okay, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Adventures to the Mind. I hope and anticipate you got a lot of value listening to Marc here in this interview. I thought what he offered was fantastic, and I'm excited that I got to have him on the show. I'm also excited that I will be participating in the iSeers integration course. So if it's something that you're curious about signing up for, use the link in the description, jameswjesso.com/iSeers integration, ICEERS integration, to go check it out. And when you sign up, use my last name, JESSO, as the promo code, and you'll get 15% off the price of the course. Beyond that, if the course is not what makes sense for you financially or in your lifestyle, definitely check out Marc's book, Psychedelic Integration, Psychotherapy for Non-Ordinary States of Consciousness. Let me see, Psychedelics for Non-Ordinary States of Consciousness. I'll leave a link to his book in the description to this episode as well. And that's all. Thank you so much for watching this episode all the way to the end. I am on a variety of social medias, links to which are in the description to this, mostly for clips. I release them through YouTube, shorts through YouTube, and shorts also through Instagram, if that is your thing. If you're not only interested in the really long form content, but love that like 30 seconds to 2 minute, like grab 'em content, you can check me out there too. And that's all. I have been your host, James Jesso. It's been a pleasure being your host, and I look forward to having you on the next episode of Adventures to the Mind. And until then, take care and stay curious.